it's more about embracing the journey than obsessing over the destination. And what I mean by that is you're going to get to the destination if you embrace the journey. Hey folks, welcome back to the Lights Out podcast. I'm David Vuyk and I'm here with Eric Nekich. We're unfortunately still missing our beloved co-host, Saint Nick Gollner, who will be back on the next episode, we promise, but he's
allegedly
he's making things happen. Over the last two episodes, this is episode 3 in a 3-part series, we've been talking through the market trends forcing automation adoption, and we've been talking about the math behind ROI calculations and the deployment strategies that separate successful launches into automation from ones that struggle. And here's what we're hearing from shop owners right now. We pulled the trigger, we've got automation running. The question that keeps us up at night is, am I actually hitting the numbers that I projected? Is it working? How do I know this is performing? So that's what we're going to tackle in this third part of the series, this final part of the series.
Absolutely. It's great to be back with you, David. And yeah, I mean, God bless Ron Popeil, but automation is not ever going to be set it and forget it, right? And there's going to be a number of things we're going to want to do after that automation's been implemented, it's been integrated, we're running it. There's going to be a number of things we want to do post-implementation to ensure that we get that ROI over a sustained period of time. And I think that it's a great way to wrap this series. And, let's start there, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with post-implementation measurement, right? How are we, what are the things we can do high level to make sure that we are maintaining ROI, right?
Yeah. I mean, without a clear measurement framework, you could be kind of flying blind, right? You might be leaving opportunity on the table. I mean, I'd hate to think that folks are leaving 30, 40% of their ROI on the table because they're just not intentional about what they're tracking. So that's what we're talking about today. It's not just about validation, it's visibility so that we can continue to improve the process and optimize things as we go.
Yeah, much like what you're buying. We talked about this in the first 2 episodes, so I might as well just, kick the horse in another spot, and that is really using the metrics to take your gut out of the equation, right?
Yeah.
I see it all the time, where it's installed, it's running parts. You come in Monday morning to finish part, and people just think that that it's going to continue to deliver consistently without monitoring it or even taking it one step beyond that ROI. And it's, how optimized are the processes? What's the next bottleneck? But I don't want to get too far ahead. We'll shoot it back your way, sir.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Ahead of this podcast episode, I was doing a little bit of research, and according to Cascade, which is an organization that publishes research on manufacturing KPIs, there are 33 core manufacturing metrics that you could theoretically track. But I mean, I got to ask you, Eric, you've been in a lot of shops. Do you meet a lot of shop owners who've got the bandwidth to track 33 different metrics?
I was going to insert the joke. Only 33. Wow. Yeah. I would have guessed at least 63. No, absolutely not. I think that 33 is asking for trouble.
Right. So I think probably a better plan then is maybe to focus on the KPIs that kind of tie directly back to the ROI calculations we were talking about in episode 2.
Right.
Is now a good time to jump into those, you think?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect time for that. And I think, a great question out of the gate is, how do you set those KPIs, right? And if you go back to the first, 2 episodes, and maybe even a continuing theme in the Lights Out podcast, is what is the business problem that the automation was, you invested in automation to solve a business problem. What was that? And those post-implementation, it's a heavy series of 2 words, that post-implementation ROI, I think, needs to focus on that, because that's the business challenge that we're trying. You're right. That was what the investment was for.
Absolutely. Yeah. So some of the things that we had talked about in episode 2 had to do with, for one, labor cost reduction. So obviously that's one of the drivers of automation. We also talked a little bit about material scrap rate. You might not see a massive improvement on that. I mean, quality improvements typically take a little longer to manifest, but you certainly don't want your scrap rate to increase as a result of that implementation. Throughput increase is kind of tied a little bit into labor cost reduction, but then being able to run something through the night to increase your capacity without increasing headcount and square footage and machine tool count. A big one is equipment utilization, right? Yep. So we're making better use of the spindles we have. That's a huge one. So, I mean, right there's 4 KPIs that are kind of a good basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you would call those almost your core KPIs in any automation, not even post-implementation, right? But just even that initial ROI grab, those are really core attributes you're going to want to be measuring.
Absolutely. So, I mean, if a shop owner called you and they're 90 days into having purchased a piece of automation and they say, hey, Eric, I'm at 20% labor cost reduction, 15% throughput increase, what would you say? Is that shop on a good track?
Yeah, absolutely, David. I think 90 days out, that's a very reasonable return. I think that reduction in labor and that increase in throughput is valuable to a lot of shops, and to be achieving that ROI 90 days into a system, I don't know how you're upset with that.
Hey, Paul, next year's 2026. Guess what happens?
That means it's an even year, which means IMTS is happening.
I'm so excited. And I assume ProShop will be there exhibiting again, as always.
Yeah, it'll be our 5th time, I think.
Wow.
Would have been 6th if COVID hadn't happened. But yeah, even after being there that many years, there's a lot to understand about that show. It is a massive event, massive execution to exhibit.
Well, and a big investment, right? It's, gosh, your time, your money.
It is a big investment. Yeah, it's one of our biggest marketing investments for sure.
Well, I'm looking forward to in January, you and Nick and I are going to be at the IMTS Exhibitor Workshop, where exhibitors can come and learn like how to get their most out of IMTS.
Yeah, the workshop is fantastic. There's a bunch of different benefits from it. One, you can connect with all the vendors for your furniture, for your logistics, for getting all your stuff in and out of the show, electrical, everything. But this year, they're also doing an executive session or series. So really focused on getting the most out of the conference. How are you going to go in with a marketing plan, really execute it, and get your maximum ROI if you're exhibiting at the show?
Well, it's a major commitment to go to the show. I mean, I go as an attendee, but seeing all the work that goes into it, if I was exhibiting, I would definitely want to maximize my experience there and get the most out of it. And the workshop I know is going to be interactive, where they really work through things. Like you said, you can place the orders, all that type of stuff. And, that's going to bring a bunch of value to exhibitors.
Yeah, absolutely. The difference between coming with a plan and executing on that, it's a big difference, as opposed to just showing up, throwing up your booth and hoping for the best. So yeah, it's definitely advisable. So exhibitors that want to make more of it, whether they're first time exhibitor or even if they've done it many times, but they really want to maximize their ROI this time, they should definitely show up at this thing. And what are the dates again?
Yeah, so it's January 27th through 29th at the McCormick Place. So you kind of get familiar with where your booth's going to be and all that type of stuff. To find out more, people should just go to amtonline.org/events and get signed up, and we'll see you there in January.
Sounds good, Mike.
Yeah. And I mean, it's important to remember too, it's not just about labor savings. A lot of people kind of think about that and they stop there. But when you pile on the increased throughput, the utilization gains, the improvements in quality, you're actually even farther ahead than just that. So it's important to kind of keep a balanced set of KPIs with that project to really understand, the total benefit. The other KPI that kind of came to mind would just be your cost per unit, which, depending on the type of work you're taking on, may be easier or harder to quantify. But that's kind of a typical one. I mean, if you're in more of a production environment, which typically lends to automation, is a good one to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, just to kind of pin off one thing you mentioned there too, I think it's important to stress that when we are redeploying those labor savings into more value-added functions of the company, it almost compounds, right? Because let's say now I don't have a valuable member of my team simply loading work pieces in and out of a machine tool. I've got automation doing that. They're off on the side optimizing programming, right? They're taking a good look at cutting tool paths, maybe bringing in new pieces of work holding, and that just compounds the ROI. So now, you're looking back at it 90 days later, and if you've redeployed that labor intelligently, I mean, the KPIs just start to really take off.
Well, and that's where, you can actually tie in another KPI, and I don't want to create this massive list of KPIs that feel impossible.
33. We're going to get to 33, folks. We're going to get there.
Definitely stop before 10. We don't have enough time to record to get all 33.
Okay.
But this is more of like a business health indicator as a result of that automation implementation, which would be manufacturing cost as a percentage of your revenue. So let me explain. Like if your pre-automation manufacturing cost was 60% of revenue, which means you're keeping 40 cents of every dollar for overhead and, profit and reinvestment. And let's say post automation, you drop to 55%. Well, you've just added 5% of profitability to every single job. That's not just ROI. That's kind of a more sustainable competitive advantage for your business moving forward. So, definitely another one to think about, which is kind of a more broader picture, business health target.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we've identified like these core KPIs. We've talked a lot on this podcast about how that sometimes that language doesn't translate really well to the shop floor. So how can we put that in context, right? When, we just gave some examples of a reduction in labor, but like what does an increase in throughput, what are those advances and those gains look like on the shop floor?
Yeah, I mean, the shop floor teams are all different, right? But I would think a lot of them, they're not waking up in the morning thinking about cost per unit or OEE, or that doesn't necessarily always translate well to the people who are actually making it happen on the shop floor. They're thinking more in terms of, hey, are we making more parts this month than we were last month? Are we dealing with a lot of downtime, or are we conquering that? Are we making a ton of scrap or not? These are kind of the more practical things or aspects that they're seeing and addressing on the shop floor.
Capacity gains, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, that job that used to take us a week and a half, takes us less time now because we've changed our process and included automation, that kind of stuff.
Outstanding. Capacity gains, that's always an interesting one to me, because I feel like, it's great for lead times, but I also believe it positions a lot of customers to bring in more work, right? Mm-hmm. And, happy customers buy more things. So again, when we talk about compounding ROI, even though I know that's not this episode, I just feel it's worth pointing that out, that so many of these honestly like branch off into other metrics that just continue to, the snowball just gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of this kind of comes down to OEE, and maybe that's a good one to drill into a little bit, because that might be one of the metrics that folks are more aware of or more interested by in terms of something that they're actually going to measure on the shop floor. And of course, OEE breaks down into three components: availability. So what percentage of scheduled time is the equipment actually running, not in breakdown mode, not in changeover mode, not waiting for raw materials. Performance, when the equipment is actually running. Is it running at the designated speed, or is it running at 80%? And quality. So when the parts come off, what percentage are actually good parts versus bad parts? So that's a really common metric that I think the whole team has to get involved with to improve. Technology can help, but it really comes down to bringing in the team, having a culture of continuous improvement, making those process improvements. And I think that's one you can celebrate as a team. If you're doing weekly stand-ups, that's a great metric to review and track your gains.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to the overall health of the company, right? There's so many times we see a process automated that creates issues upstream or downstream from that process. And OEE is just a perfect way to manage that, right? So, your performance could be through the roof, but if the availability is not dialed in, it affects performance, right? And everything from there on. You could be running, your spindle utilization could be good, but if the scrap rate's high, then your quality's suffering, and your overall OEE is gonna show you that.
Yeah, I mean, let's say you're a shop owner and you're 4 weeks into having installed a piece of automation, let's say a pallet pool, and you measure your OEE and you find that you're at 65%. I mean, is something broken? How do we know if that's, a good number or not? I think it's a great diagnostic question. And that's where you really have to understand the relationship of those three components, to your point. I mean, if availability is at, 70%, and performance is at about 95%, and quality is at 98%, which sound like amazing numbers, your OEE is going to be 66%. So just kind of remember that, kind of how that OEE number is affected by the three variables. You can actually be doing really, really good, and just be suffering in that one area, and that OEE number is going to maybe feel a little low. It could be in that case when availability is at 70%, maybe downtime's eating you, maybe equipment is breaking down, or maybe you're waiting for material. Those are the things you need to investigate so that you can improve on those numbers.
Absolutely. So, when we talk about the core components of OEE, I think that's a good, kind of transition into some of the peripherals around automation that, if done correctly or done incorrectly, can either complement the ROI or extend it much longer than you were hoping for. And one of those things, it's no secret here, I love workholding, but one of those things when it comes to automating definitely is the fixturing, whether you're doing just basic tending, or you've opted for some sort of a palletized system. If you're using the wrong work holding, we see it all the time. People will buy a 5-axis machine tool, which in and of itself is a form of automation, right? But then they'll stick with some sort of traditional work holding device, traditional clamping methodology, and you're not maximizing that technology. It's holding you back from the ROI you should be getting with that 5-axis machine tool. We've seen it in automation too, right? Where you bring in automation systems that have nice big work envelopes, great payloads, but you don't take advantage of that. You don't take advantage of that high capacity design, right, to increase your part density. So you still kind of get into this one piece flow. Obviously that might not be a problem in a low mix situation, but low mix situations, if you're not using the correct work holding, you could run into accessibility or rigidity issues. So I guess where I'm going with that is work holding is a prime example of something that if you do it correctly and you leverage an expert, it can actually speed up your ROI, right? To where if you're not doing it correctly, it can really have a negative impact on that process you're trying to automate.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest, most impactful things that you can do right off the hop to kind of add rocket fuel to these KPI improvements. Just making sure that your work holding strategy is aligned with everything else that's involved in the process. To kind of build on that same theme, what are some of the things you can do to accelerate these gains and these core KPIs and these gains in ROI would also be attacking all of the reasons why your OEE might be suffering, right? In that example, we talked about, well, why might availability be low? It could be you're suffering from machine breakdowns. It could be some kind of process reliability, like coolant issues.
Chip management for sure.
Documentation issues. So you got to be really cognizant about the full process when you're attacking this. And again, enabling your team, because they're your eyes and ears on the shop floor, to really be serious about process improvement. When they see something, they're bringing it up. They're suggesting improvements in ways that you can get around those things. It doesn't always have to be expensive. I mean, sometimes it is. That's the nature of machine shops, unfortunately. But even having something like a machine monitoring solution in place that's kind of more proactive in picking up on some of these. I'm speaking here specifically about process monitoring, so that you can pick up on any of the process issues and get on top of your process reliability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also speaks to, ownership over the ROI on the shop floor, right? Ownership of the ROI, if it just lives in the C-suite, is seldom success. I don't see it as successful as often as when you've got great shop floor buy-in, right? You've put a team of people, and you've tasked them with that ROI. And making sure that it's a success. Those are the things where, like, when I'm in those shops, those manufacturing facilities, when we're getting calls, whether it's for workholding or on the automation side of the business, but when we're getting those calls from those teams, those people, where it has become an intrinsic part of their job responsibility to make sure those investments are maximized, that the ROI is there, it's insane how much they get done. I mean, you've been in those shops, David, where they've got people that are directly accountable for the success of that ROI on the shop floor where the action happens, and they're beautiful facilities.
Oh, absolutely. You can, a second you step into one of those shops, you kind of understand that, they're set apart from the rest for that reason. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Paul, tell me about your trip to Italy.
I went there with the NTMA and we got to tour SMW Autoblok. 2 different facilities, absolutely blew me away. World-class, enormous places. I can't even count how many machines there were, but so much automation. One of the most incredible takeaways for me was the breadth of what they made. I did not know they made so many work-holding products and automation products. And I loved watching a big chuck machine a little chuck. So they were machining chucks in huge lathes. I thought that was super fun.
Yeah, you introduced them to me after you came back, and they've been to my shop. And the ideas they have to like breathe new life into some of my machines and the tools and the jobs that we're running was just shocking.
And then one of the coolest things is we're bringing this new automated pallet delivery system, the Hennig workflow, to market. And guess what the interface is? It's SMW 0-point locators. It's really sweet.
We're getting ready to get some of those.
So how do people find SMW Autoblok to look through that massive catalog of products?
It's SMW Autoblok, BLOK.com.
Yeah, get rid of that, Steve. SMW Autoblok, BLOK.com.
I did want to touch on kind of the benchmarking and comparison conversation.
Sure.
We've talked about some great metrics to track, but I think one of the questions every shop owner is asking is, okay, now we've got the numbers. How are our numbers? Are our numbers good? How do they kind of compare themselves against other shops?
That's a great question. And I always encourage them not to. Everybody wants to know how they hold up to the shop next door, or maybe even to Toyota or something like that, right? And my advice, and I mean, feel free to correct me if you think I'm wrong here, David. My advice is always, what your business challenges are and what you're trying to solve, and you also know your P&L. So you tell me if what numbers are good, right? Again, if we go back to OEE, if the issue is the machines just aren't running, and you solve that issue with industrial automation, does it matter what Sam's Precision is doing down the street? I always think about the Automation Trap series that we did when we first met with Klaus and Gary, and I mean, I think this is a perfect it's a perfect example of what we're talking about here, right? I think it was Gary. Was Gary the owner of Iron Clunk?
That's
yes,
right. Sorry to all the Garys out there, but
and he got wrapped around the wrong things that Klaus was doing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the important thing to keep in mind is that it's more about embracing the journey than obsessing over the destination. And what I mean by that is you're going to get to the destination if you embrace the journey, if you take process improvement seriously, if you take the time to measure and review the data and share it with the team and get them excited about improving things. I mean, what a great way to gamify the machine shop floor when you get everyone involved and bought in on, you've got a dashboard that you review together, and you can celebrate, how those different metrics improve.
It's been one of the most rewarding things I've ever seen in shops is when you're on the shop floor and this team, they've almost become the automation experts. Like there's been several times where I'm sitting there trying to like consult, and I'm like, I have no business being in this room. They know more than I do about the processes here and the work that they've done and what's worked and what hasn't and how they've measured it and the KPIs that they use. And
yeah. Well, ahead of this recording, I did dig a little bit into the data. So according to this 2025 manufacturing KPI research from Insight Software, they go out and they aggregate data across manufacturers. Here's just some generic values that they provided for OEE. So industry average, according to this report, is 60 to 70%. And that makes sense to me. Okay. Industry leading is 80 to 90%. Now, I would kind of interject there, like you would have to be really world-class to kind of get into that category. That is really tough to pull off. It's a great objective. But again, that average for OE is kind of in the range of 60 to 70%.
Sure. For
on-time delivery, which obviously automation can help with if you're kind of increasing that capacity. Average rate, is about 85 to 90%. Good would be 95% plus. Shout out to our sister show, Machine Shop Mastery and Paul Van Meter and ProShop. They've got great tools built into that ERP so you can measure your OTD. So kind of a tool when that's baked right into your operating system. Other things like cycle time reduction, in average would be 15 to 30% faster. Again, it's a pretty average kind of range when you're adopting automation technology.
Those are remarkable metrics, and I think that they're super helpful.
The caveat is your shop is not identical to the industry average, right?
Right.
A job shop doing custom work is going to have different targets than a high volume production facility. But the benchmark, those industry averages give you a reference point.
Yeah, very helpful. Like you said, just kind of a nice basic benchmark, right? So, yeah. One thing that I always like to talk about too, and I think it's important, we kind of keep coming back to this crawl, walk, run mentality, right? And there is it's a common pitfall where people are like, well, I'm just going to buy this system and then I'm going to run all weekend. And I think along with setting the KPIs, I think it's important that you set sort of realistic targets on timeline. And, sort of those thresholds that you're going to cross as you build up to like running lights out or running unattended over the course of a weekend or something like that. I just like to throw that in there. I have yet to see someone just park it and then on day one, that thing runs all weekend.
Yeah, that is just not realistic. You got to build there one step at a time. The cool thing I think is that when you start tracking this data, you can start to actually make projections, right? So you can look at the previous month's data and say, hey, we're on pace for an 8-month payback or, whatever it actually is. But you can then use that data to kind of project forward where you might end up. If you've got 6 months of process improvement data that coincides with your automation ROI, you can kind of, project that forward and see where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a really nice tool to be able to have as well.
Yeah, and it's also another great way to take kind of like your other KPIs, and I mean you can do some projections as to where the bottlenecks would be that would keep you from those goals, right? Again, as simple as breaking out OEE, right? If the lowest percentage in your OEE is going to be quality, well, that's going to be the bottleneck. What are some things we can start improving over there? As an example.
Yep. Yeah, it's a bit of a feedback loop, it's like measure, diagnose, communicate, adjust, and every time you run that cycle, you get better and better.
continuous improvement.
Awesome. Eric, we should also kind of bring this, back to the people. I think like one of the hardest things to accomplish is tying this all together with the shop floor team in a way that motivates them, a way that doesn't feel like surveillance. I think it's important to underline that there's a responsibility for the change management piece and to just make sure that everyone feels like they're part of the process. I think that comes down to really answering the question of why are we doing this, sharing maybe some of the baseline metrics, not necessarily like full open kimono on the company financials, but hey, here's where we're starting from. We want to see where we can get to. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You go back like 10 years, 10, 15 years, there was, that initial kind of negative response to automation of it's going to take all these jobs, right? And that's really gone away. I mean, at least just speaking from the sales process, that rarely ever comes up anymore. Everybody kind of gets now that it's about redeploying labor, that nobody really wants to be doing this kind of repetitive, but nobody wants to be doing this kind of repetitive work, right? And they see the opportunity to like move up, and where the value add is to like for the company is like doing more things, working on the business, not necessarily at the business, right? Then when it comes down to ownership of these tasks, you're absolutely right. It's about transparency, about why we're automating, what we're automating, right? And I mean, I hate to say it, but metrics can even help you with that. Like you said, you don't have to peel back, open the bank account, but if you do that initial time study, rolled throughput yield, something like that, that's showing where the holes are, where the bottlenecks are, where the problems are, right? What's keeping us from advancing forward. And then we feel this is where the automation would help, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like if you have, again, coming back to that business challenge, employees aren't naive. They're aware of those challenges too. Oftentimes they're just as frustrating for the machinist as they are the production manager, right? So
totally.
If the solution to that involves automation, in my experience, most times you're going to get a resounding please, But again, like you said, it's transparency and explaining why it's there. If I came to you and said, David, I'm buying a Fanuc robot because quite frankly, I don't want you here anymore and I feel like the robot can do your job, you're probably going to have a negative reaction to it.
Well, I actually thought if, Nick doesn't join us again for an episode, we're just going to have to build an AI agent to replace him.
Nick.
So Nick, you're on notice.
You're on notice, pal. Yeah.
Well, listen, I think we can, if you're an employer, you can kind of tie that back to what was that metric we mentioned in the first episode of this series from MT Forecast? Something like automation adoption is
the adoption rate, yeah,
like 30% in 2025. And guess what, guys? It's 2026 now, right? So, I think that's a good indicator that this is where the industry is headed. So when you're having this conversation with the team, it's like, this is the reality of where things are at. If we want to stay competitive, we want to stay successful. We want to grow revenue and profitability because that also means that you can, help your team members be more successful but bigger bonuses are only possible when the business is healthy. So, there's ways to kind of motivate excitement about it from that perspective. But I think when metrics become a conversation, not a surveillance tool, when the team becomes a part of that optimization process, you give folks a role to play in this exciting new story of being a modern tech-enabled shop, and they spot the problems and help create the solution. I think that's a wonderful place to be, and I think that's really the goal.
I agree 100%. So, we've covered a lot. I kind of want to get into like the tactics, right? That we do at the end of every episode, but
we need an action plan.
We need an action plan.
Yeah.
So again, kind of circling back to the whole purpose. I know I love all these roads we kind of go down and these side quests we do, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's about You're not going to set it and forget it. When your automation system hits the floor, there's more work to do, right? And it's up to you to ensure that it's performing as intended, as you planned on it performing when you had the dream that this thing was going to come in and solve, business challenge XYZ. And, we've talked about some core KPIs. David, my friend, what are three things we can do post-implementation? Again, and I love these tactics because we look for things like pretty much anybody can do, right? They're all relatively economical. Just about anybody can do them. So what are the three post-implementation tactics we've got to help lock in ROI?
Well, you know what? I think just as a reminder from episode 2, you want to pull together your pre-automation baseline data. So just a reminder there, we already talked about it. That's not a new action, but just a reminder in case you didn't hear the last episode, that's an important starting point. I think you want to pick your core metrics that you're going to track. And my suggestion would be that OEE, throughput, and utilization should probably be on that list. What do you think, Eric?
I think so. I think they're pretty universal, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to create sort of a standard because I've never, ever been in a shop that just buys one piece of automation and stops there,
I think you need to also then define your measurement system. Not everyone has, fancy machine monitoring, process monitoring. So it could be a spreadsheet at minimum. It could be a pen and paper at minimum, frankly, to kind of start pulling this data and tracking it on an ongoing basis. You want to get your team involved. Again, they're your eyes and ears on the shop floor. I think operator logging of data, when you can do it, is helpful.
Yeah.
I think you want to do a regular KPI review, not just with your leadership, but your whole team.
Amen to that. Yeah, absolutely.
And celebrate the wins as they happen and really build that culture of continuous improvement. Remember, it's not just, hey, buy a pallet pool and all our problems will be solved. And people understand that. But it is more about embracing the journey and having a team that's hungry to keep improving the process and getting better. And when you gamify that with KPIs, when you have that on dashboards that everyone can see, and when you celebrate the wins, I think you can get some real momentum behind this journey. And of course, tying it back to the theme of the series, you're going to get great ROI, which means your business is going to be doing really well also.
Phenomenal. David, every time we do an episode together, I pull something you say that just, it's great. And I plan on plagiarizing you.
Metrics not as a surveillance tool.
Yeah, absolutely love that. No, I think that's really good, and it should resonate with a lot of people. So yeah, great episode, David.
I agree. Okay, well, I think that's a wrap. So that's it for this episode of the Lights Out Podcast and this series on ROI. Big thanks to my co-host, Eric Nekich, for helping us break down how to actually measure success after you automate, because automation only works if it delivers real ROI. If this conversation helps you think differently about what to track, how to benchmark, and where automation is really paying off, make sure that you like and subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And please share this episode with a friend or colleague who might be interested in automation or who is actively investing in it and wants to make sure that it's actually moving the needle. At the end of the day, Lights Out Manufacturing isn't about buying technology. It's about measuring outcomes. We'll see you on the next episode.
Yeah, I'm going to get these lights on the way out. Take care, David.
Hey, it's Paul from Making Chips. If you've been burned by recruiters who don't understand manufacturing, you are not alone. That's exactly why we created Hire MFG Leaders. We're not just recruiters, we're current and former shop owners, and we know what it takes to lead in this industry. Whether you're hiring your next operations leader, sales manager, or production supervisor, we'll help you find someone who actually fits. Learn more at makingchips.com/hire.